tonight, and I have a really wonderful guest. Her name is Laura Diehl, and she's an author, teacher, and speaker, having ministeried in more than a dozen nations. And after the death of her oldest daughter, Laura, and her husband, David, they founded GPS Hope, which stands for Grieving Parents Sharing Hope, to help parents navigate the swirling black waters of grief and come to a place of hope and life again. She's written many books. Her most popular books are When Tragedy Strikes, Rebuilding Your Life with Hope and Healing After the Death of Your Child, and the publisher is Morgan James Publishing House, which is also my publisher. They're wonderful. And also she has a book, My Grief Journaling Coloring Book, and Journaling for Grieving Parents. So Laura, welcome so much, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Cindy.
Great. I'm so sorry about the death of your daughter.
Thank you.
How long ago has that been?
It's been a little over 5 years. It was actually October 12th, 2011.
Wow. Wow. I'm so sorry. Do you want to share a little bit about that process and what happened?
Yeah, sure. Actually, it started way back when she was young. When she was only 3 years old, she was diagnosed with bone cancer.
Oh,
and
wow.
so at 3 years old, she actually had her left leg amputated, that little tiny leg, and went through 9 months of chemotherapy. And it was several years later that we were told that one of the drugs they were using at that time was causing heart damage in children. And so we had her tested, and yeah, she had definitely had some heart damage from the chemo. And so at that point, it started being monitored, and she got married, became pregnant, and with that pregnancy, it escalated the heart issues majorly. They actually gave her a 50-50 chance of surviving the labor and delivery. And she survived and gave us a beautiful granddaughter. And but her heart condition then got worse from that point on, to the point where she needed to be on a transplant list. And she was not even healthy enough to be put on the transplant list. They gave her what's called a VAD, a ventricular assist device, which was, they opened her up, put in a 6-pound pump inside of her to run the left side of her heart, closed her back up. And so it was just a lot of equipment that went along with it. She was hooked up to a computer and 2 battery packs that had to be with her all the time. At night, she was plugged into a wall unit. And so a lot went on with that pump. She had it for a year. She ended up with a stroke during that time. She had like 2 medevac rides, emergency situations, ended up having to take the pump out at one point. And basically, at one point, she was in the hospital for what was routine for her. It was a fluid overload, and they would give her IV Lasix to try to get that fluid off as quickly as possible. And she was supposed to be dismissed the nenext morning, and her heart just finally gave out.
Oh my goodness, how awful. I just can't even imagine actually getting to that point. I actually have had a little bit of a situation in my own life. I think you've seen that as well, where my son is actually having liver failure, and he actually required a liver transplant. And you know, he miraculously did get a liver donated for him, and it happened to be 32 years old, the woman who was wonderful to donate her organs. But I can, just going through this recently and actually still in the midst of it, it's so emotional and it's so draining. And they said that there'll be many operations to come, not necessarily about the liver, but other subsequent things. So I can only relate for you to be living this over years and years and years. And I can imagine it must have been very difficult, and even in a way grieving throughout the whole process of years having to deal with this, not just the actual death of your daughter.
Right, yeah. It's a very long journey, a very long process. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. Grief itself is a process, and our culture as a whole, I don't think we handle grief very well or allow people to grieve very well. And when it's your child, it's such a unique grief because it's just wrong to bury your child, and there's so many things that go along with that the grief stretches into years. I mean, like that dark, deep grief that keeps you from being able to function. I mean, literally physically, scientists have shown there are chemical changes in your brain and your adrenals. I mean, it's just your heart, literally. And we saw that recently with the death of Debbie Reynolds after Carrie Fisher passed. And so it's a very long process, and a lot of people just don't realize how long of a process that is when you lose a child to go through that deep of a grief.
Yes, it is. And I think I'd love for you to talk about this, because you actually do a ministry about actually helping people with this hope, to be able to help support each other. And I'd love to have you share with us how some of that process goes along. How do you cope with your spouse and your children and your own grief, and anyone that maybe had played a role in actually the death? It could be a vehicular, accident or something. How do you recommend that people actually help go through that grieving process?
Well, it's a loaded question for a 30-minute show.
I know.
The biggest thing I think I could say is maybe three things. One is, as a grieving parent, you really, really, really need to connect with other parents who are ahead of you on this journey, because there's no words to really describe it. And most parents, I wouldn't say most parents are suicidal, but we don't want to live anymore. Right. Even if we have other children, we're done here. We just want to go and join our child. And so it's really, and we feel like it's hopeless and we're never going to get past this darkness. And so I think it's really important for grieving parents to connect with other grieving parents or bereaved parents who are further on the journey, so that we can walk with you through this, because you really do need that. It's very encouraging, or at least there's a glimmer of hope for someone who's there with you. And for people around us, we need a lot of grace in our grieving within the family, because everybody handles grief differently. Mm-hmm. Every relationship with that child was different. You probably have siblings that are involved in that, and like you said, plus the spouse. And what typically happens a lot of times in marriages is, like, the mom is very, we want to look at the pictures, we want to be in their room, we want to hold their things, we want to go to the cemetery. That's how we're processing this. And a lot of times the husband, usually whichever of the couple is, they do it opposite, because opposites attract. That's true. And in this case, most of the time, the husbands, they want to protect their wife. It's their natural instinct to want to help their wife, and they can't help us. And they think by helping us, it's like, stop looking at those pictures, stop going to the cemetery. Right. You're just doing this to yourself, because they're processing it differently, and the way they process it is to kind of seal it off and process it away from it. And we process it by being drawn to it. And so a lot of marriages, we say there's no wrong way to grieve, but when it comes to our spouse, there seems to be a wrong way to grieve if it's not like me.
Well, and that's a really great point to bring up. And I want to just bring up a whole different component to it, actually biological. And that is, men need testosterone. And when they feel, and I actually just interviewed John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, and he has a brand new book coming out, Beyond Mars and Venus. And what it really is about is that, like you're saying, but without understanding the chemistry behind it, the hormonal part of it, men actually become almost impotent when they are too feely, when they're too feminine energy, because it allows their testosterone to go down, and that makes them feel weak. And of course, men from the caveman days on, for them to feel strong and providing for the family, they bring in the buffalo, they bring in the money, they want to be able to produce, they have that masculine energy. So when we ask our men in just normal situations, how do you feel? That if they stay on an emotional level for a long time, it actually lowers their testosterone, making them feel incapable and they're not providing. So that's just biology. Now, women, we need estrogen, and if you're in your menstrual cycle, progesterone. And what happens in women's lives, especially in today's culture in the 21st century, women are out actually working in the industries, and so we tend to have more of a masculine energy. We have to perform, we have to do tasks. And actually what's being found out is in today's world that women are having a harder time moving back into their feminine energy because we're so structured in what we have to do. We have to be the wife, we have to be the mother, we have to be the professional business person, we have to be the sports scheduler and all that stuff. And it's so many demands and scheduling that we are actually living in a masculine energy. And for women, we're finding it more difficult to become more, not weaker than a man, but to be able to be more softer and go into our feminine energies of creativity, softness, and allowing men, whether it's our children or our partners, to be able to take that more masculine energy and provide for us. And actually what's causing, this is actually causing by women not having enough estrogen, is that you're finding women are substantially getting higher degrees of Alzheimer's, more than men. We're having more heart disease because we are working in a more masculine energy. So I love what you brought up about how we grieve differently. And I think it's just more than just grieving different. I think it's a biology. And that for men, if we can understand that their grieving process, and this could be children, boys in your family, teenager boys, that it's the same thing, that if you're asking them to be super emotional, that's only going to make them feel weaker and weaker as a man, as a masculine person, which is going to be actually very poor for their health. And that understanding the biology is really important, where women need to be able to express. And one of the things John Gray had mentioned to us, just when you have normal relationships with your spouse, not having to even overcome grief, is to say to your husband, I need to give me 10, 15 minutes to let me vent, let me express my emotions. You don't have to say a word. You don't have to fix it. I just need a sounding board to hear what I'm saying, to know that I'm going through this. And once the men know they don't have to fix it, don't have to make it better, just that you're there to support them, it really takes the pressure off the men. So that might be a real beneficial thing you can ask of your husband when you're actually in this grieving process.
Yeah, I understand all that, but the world of grief with burying your child is such a different world that to try to analyze it, you're in such a fog, you're so numb, you're in so much pain. There are a lot of times unforgiveness is an issue. You're angry at God, you're angry at anyone who is directly or indirectly related, the cause of the death. You're angry at your child for leaving, believe it or not. A lot of parents deal with that. So, and literally there are chemical dysfunctions in our brain. I mean, like you can forget how to peel an orange. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how bad it is. So, I don't know if grieving parents would really be able to analyze to that depth. All they know is that you're not grieving like I am, and that means you must not love your child. Like the woman's thinking, you must not have loved him or her as much as I did, or you'd be, wanting to look at pictures and everything too. And the husband is thinking, you're still falling apart, and if you'd stop looking at all this stuff, it would help.
Well, see, that's because they're trying to fix it. So what do you say to parents as you do your ministry and you reach out and you're working with grieving parents? How do you help them? I mean, it's fine to say, you have to have hope. And I've actually had some experiences with James in Prague, and I actually had my stepfather come back in spirit, and he had advanced Alzheimer, couldn't think, he couldn't see, had macular degeneration, he couldn't hear, and he was perfectly physically fit in the spiritual realm. And the first thing he said when he came back in spirit, as James spoke, was that you are perfect just the way you are. Now, I was having marital problems, and I was trying to change to become what my husband wanted me to be. I was very unhappy. But the point is that when our departed ones leave, that the greatest gift we can give our loved ones, I believe, is that knowing that they want us to move on. And of course we grieve their loss. It's like you said, there's no words to express how it hurts so much. And because you feel so vulnerable, you want to blame it on all these different potential parts, and So how then do you really get someone through this process? Because it does take time and everyone grieves differently. What do you say to the people that are listening to this that would give them some steps to be able to be compassionate and kind to themselves to help them with this grieving process?
Well, first of all, you have to give each other grace. You have to give each other grace. And the sibling grief is a whole nother can of worms. We don't have time to go into that, but the sibling piece of things is very, very deep as well. Very deep. And so that's just a whole nother piece, but everybody's falling apart. Everybody's a mess. And I'm not talking for a few weeks. I'm talking for a few years. And it's legitimate. That's one thing that it's so hard to get people to understand. When you have lost a child, it shatters every piece of your life for the rest of your life. We have a daughter that's getting married in April. She will not have her sister as her maid of honor. She doesn't want a big wedding. She wants something small, tiny, a few family and friends. That's it, because her sister's not going to be there. That's supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life. It's going to be a very bittersweet day for our entire family. Anytime you hear the word family picture, family event, family picnic, a wedding, a baby shower, anything like that is a whole nother trigger into the depth of something we will never ever have that is supposed to be there. And it's a part of our very being. It's like an amputation because our child is a part of our being. And so when that child dies, it's like a very part of our being has been cut off from us. And we have to figure out how to live with that part of us cut off. And it literally takes years. And people around us, 5 months, 3 months, 6 months will say, when are you going to quit your crying? When are you going to get back to normal? When are you going to let go of this? And it's like, how? This was my child. Just because my child isn't here on earth anymore does not mean I'm going to stop thinking about them, their birthday, their death date, any family event, and even walking in a store, seeing their favorite box of cereal can totally make you fall apart unexpectedly. Just all these kinds of things we're constantly, day after day, for the rest of our lives, it's in our face that our child is gone. And it takes a long, long time to get out of the depths of the darkness of that and figure out who I am and how do I live without my child. And so one of the things, like I said already, is that some of the things that I've been saying here, if there is a parent who's a bereaved parent who's watching this right now, they're probably very relieved by all these things I'm saying, because it's not just them. It's normal grief when you bury your child, these dark things and the constant reminders that you're having to overcome. You can live again. You can live a thriving, full life again. But when you're in the depth of that, I would say for the first year, 2 to 3 years, you can't even see that. You can hear it. It's kind of like you're in the, I know that in my head, but I don't ever see it happening. And so, like I said, the biggest thing that I can recommend is for grieving parents to get around other bereaved parents. I didn't want to do that for a while because I was such a mess. I didn't want to be around a whole bunch of people that were a mess like me. I thought it would be very morbid. We'd sit around crying and all that kind of thing. And I would leave feeling worse than when I went. Well, I went to a conference. I made myself go to a Grieving Moms conference. And it was actually being around a bunch of people who were a mess like me was actually wonderful. It was very freeing because for the first time, I was around people who got it. I didn't have to explain myself to them. If I laughed, I didn't have to feel guilty. Because everybody around us, if we had a good laugh about something, we all understood there's still this undercurrent of sorrow that is there under the laughter. If you were crying, if you wanted to you just had to pull away and isolate yourself. You just didn't have to explain yourself to anybody there because everybody there got it. And
there was just total acceptance, and you didn't have to put on a facade to make you think, I had to feel happy, or I have to make them feel better in their pain. You could just be utterly yourself at whatever moment you are at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of energy because it becomes our responsibility to make the people around us comfortable with our grief.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes our responsibility to put on a mask and make everybody think we're okay.
Right.
And that takes so much energy to do that because everybody around us wants us to be okay. And if we're not, several months down the road, they just don't want to be around us anymore.
Well,
because
that brings up a really great point. I think that's really important because your friends and family outside of your internal family, if you will, your very close-knit family, they want to do more. They want to offer you more. They want to be there to support you and try to take away your pain. But they don't know what to say to you. They don't know how to make it better. And like you're saying, you feel like you have to make them feel better because they're feeling uncomfortable.
Right. And I actually wrote a book for that purpose. It's called Come Grieve Through Our Eyes. And the reason I wrote that book was so that the family and friends around us could see some of those things. Like when someone says, how many children do you have? How do I answer that?
Oh, exactly.
I have 5 kids. Do I want to go into the story that my oldest child is in heaven with the Lord, no longer here on earth? Because then they're either going to feel sorry for me, they're going to walk away, they're going to feel very awkward. There are so many things to think about. Or when someone says, how are you? I just buried my child. How do you think I am?
Right.
You know what I mean? Those are the kinds of things that go through your head, things that are in normal conversation. We don't think anything of it. But when you've lost a child, the thoughts that go through your head on how to answer even simple questions like that can be draining.
And also asking that question one day might be perfectly fine, but asking it an hour later, it might just set you off because you're in a different emotional state,
Exactly.
So what can you...
Come Grieve Through Our Eyes, I wrote specifically to show some of these things that we deal with that people don't realize. It's like when our daughter had her amputation, she had a prosthetic leg. And so we dealt with what it's like to have an amputation in the home. Her leg would be laying around. It's like, Becca, come get your leg and put it in your room. Just crazy things like that. How to give her a pair of shoes. One foot's growing, the other foot's not growing. So what size shoe do you get?
Oh, exactly. I never thought of something like that. Yes.
When she goes swimming, she'd have to take her leg off, hop on one foot, jump in the pool, and then when she was done swimming, all wet, hop on one foot back to her leg and put her leg on, and just kind of hold your breath while you're watching her hop in all this water and slippery surface. So, there are all kinds of things that you just don't think about unless you've been there. And that's the same with having a child. There are so many things that people around us just don't think about that we're now dealing with on a daily basis unless you've been there. And so that was why I wrote the one book, was to try to explain what life is like for us now so that they can get a better understanding of how really truly to help us and what truly is helpful. And one of the biggest things that people can do is let us talk about our children or bring our children up to us, because our biggest fear is that our child will be forgotten.
Okay.
They're not here on earth anymore. They're going to be forgotten. And people think, oh, I'm afraid I'll make her cry. I would much rather you bring up a memory. Oh, I was thinking about Becca the other day when she did this. And I would much rather you bring her up, even if it brings tears, than not to talk about her at all and pretend like she never existed. And so that's one of the best things people can do for someone who's lost a child, if you know someone, is to allow them to talk about their child or even give them an opportunity to talk about their child. Because I guarantee you they're thinking about their child anyway. Right.
So what's the right way for someone to say, I'm going to cough, excuse me. So fortunately, I haven't had this experience, but knowing that many of us do have family and friends that are in this situation, what would be the best way to say something to you, to someone that's grieving, that is soft enough and compassionate enough, instead of saying how you're feeling or how you're doing? What would you recommend as a few different sentences to have that introduction into the conversation?
One thing is to honestly and earnestly ask, how are you doing right now? And look them in the eye and mean it sincerely, because we can tell if someone's just asking a question, glossing over, they don't really want to know. And that is really kind of rare to have someone actually say, no, I mean it. How are you doing? Just giving a hug if your relationship is appropriate, is close enough. Just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. I'm praying about you today. Anytime, like I said, like a memory that comes to mind, there is absolutely nothing wrong with sending a text, making a phone call and leaving a message, even if they don't answer. Just say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. Or, hey, I just remembered, Becca, the time Becca did this, and I just thought I would just, send that memory your way so we could remember it together, or let you know about that. And just, don't try to fix them. Don't say things like, well, at least she's in heaven now. At least she's not hurting now. It's like, I know that more than you do, but that doesn't fix this. That doesn't make my pain go away. It really doesn't. Those kinds of things. Well, God must have wanted another angel. God doesn't kill people to fill an angel roster. Okay?
Right. I agree.
Those kinds of cliches that people are used to throwing out there, well, God says he'll work everything out together for good. I just want my daughter back. It's so those kinds of things, try to avoid those kinds of cliches. Just be there. Be a listening ear. Tell them you're sorry. Tell them that you're praying for them. And a lot of times when we throw out those, hey, let me know if you need anything, we don't know what we need. We have no clue what we need. And I know of parents that have lost their child. Someone will say, hey, let me know if you need anything. And they'll reach out and say, I really need my laundry done. And nobody will return the call. Because like I said, even the simplest of things, for weeks, a lot of moms, if you can get out of bed and just plain get dressed, you have done a major victory feat that day. Much less, you have to go on autopilot if you have other children to continue taking care of them. It's very overwhelming. And so just those little things, the meals come for a while, cards come for a while, those sympathy things come for a while, and then life sets in, and people forget. And maybe they don't forget, but they don't tell us that they're thinking of us or our child. And so to me, that's a really good thing. Don't forget about us. Don't forget about our children.
Laura, I really appreciate that you've written so many books, and you really are willing to share your story, your expertise, and learning how you were able to handle your own grief and your family's grief. And I think asking for help is so important, and being part of a tribe or a community that is there to help support you, as you've talked about, and it's in your book, is so elemental and so basic, and just being able to connect where someone else is also experiencing grief that is so significant. Like you said, brings you that comfort that you're really looking for.
Yeah, it is.
Is there anything else that you want to share about your book that really would help people realize why they need to read your book?
My book that's published by Morgan James, the When Tragedy Strikes, Rebuilding Your Life After the Death of Your Child, is actually a book that was written. I was actually very fresh in my grief process. And I took a lot of my journal entries, and what it is about is taking the depth of my grief and how I fought my way out of that blackness. I didn't know anyone who had lost a child. I didn't have any grief support groups for children. It's a totally different kind of grief. I cannot sit in a grief support group and listen to someone talk about, I'm trying to decide if I'm ready to date again or not. I buried my child. I can't relate to, it's such a total different kind of grief. I couldn't find a support group that, around here. And so I just fought my way out. I have a little prayer room under my basement stairs, and I spent hours and hours in there crying and just playing for me, worship music, soaking music, bringing me into the presence of God, not allowing myself to be angry at God, because we all know he could have stopped it. Getting past the why and start asking how God can I get past this? How can I get through to the other side of this where it's not black and hopeless? And so the book, When Tragedy Strikes, is my journey, but I do it in a way, we build a house together. we start out in the foundation of forgiveness, which is a huge piece of grieving when you've lost a child. And we go into the garage of tears, and we go into the bedroom of rest, and we look out the window of hope. And my husband wrote a chapter, The Support Beam of Grace. And so I just walk with grieving parents in the depth of my darkness. It's very raw and real about what it's like. And so that's what that book does. It helps parents see another parent who was exactly where they are, and the things that I did to help get me out, and the things that God spoke in my heart to help change my perspective to get me to a different place. You know, like for one thing, for me, it was very, it was like I almost couldn't breathe when I thought about Becca being gone for a year or 2 years or 5 years or, oh my goodness, 20 years. I mean, it was like I couldn't hardly even breathe thinking that way. And so what God showed me was that I'm not getting further away from her. Every day I'm here, I'm actually a day closer to her, my own departure. And so those kinds of perspectives that God would speak to me that are all in this book, When Tragedy Strikes.
Wonderful, wonderful. And tell everyone what your website is, and if they want to find a grief support group around them, or how to connect with you personally, that would be really great.
Right. Our website is www.gpshope.org. It stands for Grieving Parents Sharing Hope. And they'll find all kinds of things there. I have a weekly video blog that I do. I have an Expressions of Hope written blog that I do. We have a Facebook page. Just go to Facebook/GPS Hope. They'll find us there. We have a remembrance wall. We're getting ready to do a summit for grieving parents.
Yeah, that's going to be
I
great.
haven't told anybody yet, so this is the first time saying anything about it. I have 15 speakers who are going to come together in the topic of bereaved parents. They're all bereaved parents themselves who've written books. They're speakers, organizations, free specialists, and so people can attach that. We'll have information about that on our website, which should be up and running tomorrow for people to be able to register for that.
Great.
I'm excited about that.
I am too. I'm really excited, and because I really believe that our spirit, our angels do connect to us, and we need to be open to seeing that beautiful connection. And on my summit, actually, there's someone that actually talks about Love Never Dies, Dr. Jamie Torndorf. She talks about how she communicates with her husband, and there's really miracles, and there really is a very small veil in between our physical life and our spiritual life. And so I really encourage all of you, if you're listening to this, you might know someone that really could benefit from Laura's profound work and her own personal story. And I encourage you all to go out and buy her book and check out her website and the beautiful ministry work that she's done. And her and her husband have really used this situation to really reach the world. So Laura, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your really wonderful story. And again, you can find her books on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and if they're not in your bookstore, ask them and they'll be able to get that book in there for you so you can purchase it. So thank you again, Laura. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for letting me share, Cindy.